As we hear over and over again in the teachings, sentient beings have the Buddha potential. That means we can all become fully awakened for the benefit of all. And an ordinary being has also the potential to do great harm. So a very easy way to check the state of our mind is to take a look at someone, for example, who's rich and famous, whose life is under the unrelenting microscope of social media. And maybe we jump into the fray sometimes and join the chorus of criticism and judgment. And maybe we could actually make this person an object of our compassion. So since learning of the passing of Queen Elizabeth last week, I have reflected a lot on her life, and of course the media is helping me remember this day by day. And I first encountered Queen Elizabeth before I went to school. My mom was a pianist and my godmother was a singer, and they were invited to start every function in town. And every function in town, whether it was a school assembly or a funeral often, or some public event or banquet, would start with Britain's national anthem, God Save the Queen. And once I hit grade 1, every single day, first thing, we would stand and we would look at the picture of Queen Elizabeth in the front of the room, and there was a picture of Queen Elizabeth in every single classroom, in the gymnasium, in public buildings, you name it. We would stand and face the picture of Queen Elizabeth and sing God Save the Queen, with a recording, of course. So I was very acquainted with Queen Elizabeth growing up. And so, of course, this talk could be met with yes, buts in every single sentence. She's a sentient being. And of course, she and her family have made mistakes like we all have. But I'd like to draw out some elements of her life that can really point to help us understand who she was and the role that she played on the planet, and why we can have compassion for her situation. So she was born in 1926, and her name at that point was Princess Elizabeth Alexandra Mary. She was born to the Duke of York, later known as King George VI, and her mother was Elizabeth Bowes-Lyon. So of course, at the time of her birth, no one had a clue that eventually she would become the Queen of England. Nobody. The Queen of Britain, I should say, let alone her. And so the first decade of her life was just a life of privilege, of course, and without the pressure of knowing that she was headed for this situation. She never attended school or classes. She was brought up by nannies and governesses and private tutors. So her life was really insular. And then from the moment that her uncle, King Edward VIII, abdicated in a scandal over his relationship with the American divorcee, Wallis Simpson, in 1936, Elizabeth was 10 years old at that time, and she entered a line of succession that no one anticipated. After the outbreak of World War II in 1939, Elizabeth and her younger sister Margaret were sent to Windsor to escape the threat of German bombing. And then in 1940, at the age of 14, she gave her first radio broadcast. This is a 14-year-old. And she said these words that have been uttered over and over again since that time. And she said, "My sister Margaret Rose and I feel so much for you, as we know from experience what it means to be away from those we love most of all." So this message was directed at the British kids who had been evacuated to North America, but also, according to her biographer, Ben Pimlott, it was intended to sway official thinking in Washington. USA had not yet entered the war. So already this little girl was being geared for something bigger. She didn't attend college or university, where she might have met other teenagers, But she led this royal life. And after a while, she was helping her father inspect soldiers of the Grenadier Guards. And her first public engagement was at age 18, where she was performing official duties on behalf of her father, who was often away traveling. So just think of this life that is so geared and so protected, so insular. And apparently the only time she's known to have had any kind of communal education was in early 1945, shortly before the end of World War II, where she was enrolled briefly in the Auxiliary Territorial Service, training in the skills of driving and maintaining military vehicles. So we're looking at a picture of Elizabeth here in 1945, with her hands all grubby and dirty, and apparently she loved working with engines. In 1947, when she was only 21 years old, during a royal tour of South Africa, which was then part of the British Commonwealth, in a radio broadcast to Britain's empire and former colonies, she said this to her listeners. Now remember, she's 21. "My whole life, whether it be long or short, shall be devoted to your service and to the service of our great imperial family to which we all belong." At this point, she still has no idea about where she's headed, but this is her commitment to service at age 21. And she continued, "But I shall not have the strength to carry this out unless you join in it with me, as I now invite you to do." In 1952, after her father had been sick for quite some time, he passed away. And at the time, she was on a tour in Kenya. She at first had no idea that suddenly she was Queen of Britain. Like in a heartbeat, she became queen. And then she was officially crowned Queen Elizabeth II on June 2nd, 1953. She was 27 years old. And her interests at that time that anyone else knew about was basically limited to horseback riding, corgis, and horseback riding. But as you can see, her whole life was geared for this position that she later took up with unwavering commitment. During her Christmas address, which became an annual event, in 1957, 5 years after she became queen, she said these words. So she clearly understood what her role was, the limitations, and its reach. And she said, "I can't lead you into battle. I don't give you laws or administrative justice. But I can do something else," she said. "I can give you my heart." At that point, she was 30 years old, the mother of 2 children, the Queen of Britain. So there's so much we can learn from the lives of others. And Venerable Churton has encouraged us to really investigate the lives of people that, especially the way I'm hearing it, that I may feel critical of, and to look at their upbringing and to think, how would I be any different than her if I had been brought up in that situation? Not very. And so from the time of her birth, she was in the spotlight that just grew in intensity and scope and unrelenting scrutiny. It was unrelenting. She ruled for 7 decades. And in terms of the famous, I don't think there's another person on the planet who's been more photographed, filmed, written about, gossiped about, revered and honored by some. Her life has been portrayed in television and film, and it's the unrelenting scrutiny that she had to, obviously she developed the fortitude to bear. And then we all know many of the details of the scandals, the crises that her family experienced, and in no moment that I think I've ever noticed or read about, she never considered stepping away from her role. She had this unwavering commitment to serve people. And she was Queen Elizabeth 24/7. She did not get a break. She didn't get a holiday from that role. Even on holiday, the paparazzi were there snapping away, trying to find her. So I see in her a remarkable commitment to offering service And it may have been limited in its scope. Of course it was. It's not like a bodhisattva commitment. But she had the strength to persevere through these extraordinary challenges. Obviously, she never gave up on any of her children, and she obviously had the ability to forgive these incredible things that they went through as a family. And so I would ask myself, and I'm asking you, how would your family fare if you were the subject of constant scrutiny, if your teenage years were filmed, written about, exposed, shared on social media, commented on? How would we have fared? For many, Queen Elizabeth's ethical conduct and her steady presence was a comfort to many. She acted like a ballast through those decades that brought so many challenges that, really from World War II right through to the present pandemic. And obviously her commitment was just unwavering. I mean, 2 days before she passed away, 2 days, she meets the next Prime Minister of England. She was dressed, she was photographed, she was present, she shook the person's hand, she welcomed the next Prime Minister, and probably in less than 48 hours, she was heading to her next life. So I think she has cultivated a lot of virtue in certain areas, and I really hope that that virtue allows her to have precious human rebirth in all her future lives, and that she can use this fortitude that she cultivated in this life, and this inner strength and determination to serve others no matter what. And may that find endless expressions in all of her future lives and to steer her towards full awakening for the benefit of all. And may we take her example of this unwavering commitment to serve as an example for what we can do with what time we have left in this life.
As an American mostly saw was cutting ribbons, going to fancy meetings for charity, fundraising, cutting some more ribbons, shaking people's hands. She gave a lot of comfort to people, but the service was itself seemed rather perfunctory and superficial. As an American, is this just my way of seeing Queen Elizabeth, or is it accurate at all?
Do you want me to respond in my own way? That's what I mean about the yes buts. So as a Canadian, she was very much in the lives of Canadians until about 1982 when Pierre Trudeau brought the Constitution back to Canada. And so just what I observed as a child and looking at my parents and grandparents, they looked to her as an example of living a moral life. And so that was the message that I got growing up as a child. And that she took this role, even though the limitations were huge, as you're describing, but she took that role so seriously for her entire life. And it was limited for sure.
She managed many companies around the world and made a good of benefit because the wealth of the royal family is well known. So many companies for oil and cement and other things where many people benefit from working there. Its wealth, the wealth of the royal family, it's enormous. So I heard that she was really in command of the big decisions.
What I read about the ribbon cutting in a biography was it actually wasn't ribbon cutting. That was what was photographed. But the Red Cross, for instance, if she was a patron of the Red Cross, and she was of hundreds of organizations, she took it upon herself to really research that organization very deeply. And then, although the ribbon cutting was photographed, her intention was to show support for that organization, for fundraising and for the goodness that they brought to the world, and also to have private meetings with all the people in charge to give them support and to encourage them to continue working with the poor or the homeless or whatever it was. So the photograph doesn't really, in my mind, it doesn't really give a full picture of the actual work that went behind. I was very surprised to find they might spend an entire week studying with scholars in the area of food distribution, for instance, to have meaningful conversations with the people in these organizations.
So I just have to be the yes but person, because she did all these wonderful things, and her role was quite circumscribed.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But from other parts of the world, she's receiving a lot of criticism because she represents, by no choice of her own, by inheriting that role, the image of the colonizers who exploited other countries. And people are saying she didn't do anything about it. I often wonder, could she have done something about it? Or was that outside of her role? Was there a way that she could have, with the charities, done something? I don't know. But it's to get a complete view of it. Yeah. It's hard. I mean, it would be hard to be in that role and see the human rights violations going on and not be able to say anything.
Right.
But also considering how limited her education was, how much was she aware of that? And was the British public in general even aware of that?
Mm-hmm.
Or the attitude of we are this great empire who's benefiting the world, that just blinded everybody. So these are questions to
and very
look at.
valuable ones.
Yeah.
So thanks for making the picture larger.